For the next 25 minutes, we'll be joined by Maryland Democratic Congressman Johnny Olszewski. He joins us now via Zoom. Congressman, you were in the chamber late last night for that vote to reopen the government. You voted against that legislation. Why?
Yeah, John, good morning. I voted against that legislation because of what it does and doesn't do. And while I'm really happy to see that our hardworking federal workers are going to be paid and that services are restored, this is a bill that does nothing to address the absolutely crushing cost of healthcare that Americans are now seeing as they go to enroll with their Affordable Care Act subsidies expiring. We're talking about a $4,700 tax increase for the average family of four in Maryland. That is devastating for a working family. The legislation also does nothing to stop President Trump from taking money away from the funds that were just appropriated, as he's done time and time again. $9 billion in public broadcasting and foreign aid, $9 billion more through green energy projects in Democratic led states and Democratic led districts. He's explicitly threatened the Key Bridge in Baltimore to take back that funding. But what this legislation does do is it enables outright corruption. It allows for $1 million checks to go to U.S. senators who had phones legally subpoenaed, their phone records legally subpoenaed, and all they have to do is file a claim. It is outright corruption, and it's disgusting. It's why Americans hate politics. It's what's wrong with this Congress, and it made it a very easy no vote for all of those reasons. We could have made this a bipartisan bill that addressed those concerns and reopened the government, but instead, extreme Republicans chose not to work with us to do just that.
If it does and doesn't do all those things that you just said, was this all worth it? Would a longer shutdown have changed anything?
Well, it's hard to prove the counterfactual, right? So what I can say is I think Democrats were absolutely right to point out the fact that Republicans were completely unwilling to do anything about extending the subsidies that are so critical to keep healthcare affordable. Now we have to have a conversation about the underlying issues that are driving up healthcare costs in this country, and I welcome that conversation, but we can't allow families in America to take on thousands of dollars of debt, thousands of dollars of new tax increases while we're spending $1 trillion to bail out the most wealthy in this country, to give extended tax breaks permanently to billionaires in America. We found $40 billion, or I should say the president found $40 billion to bail out his buddy in Argentina, but he couldn't be bothered to use that money to give a 2-year extension, the same cost for those subsidies here. So I think we were right to raise that issue. I think we were right to raise the issue about the president unilaterally making these cuts to what were bipartisan budgets. Let's remember. So, if we don't have those protections against the cuts, this deal isn't worth the paper it's written on. And then to have the president sign off and to have members of Congress sign off on this corruption. I mean, with corruption, usually you have at least some bribe or some quid pro quo. This is Congress explicitly saying only U.S. senators can get $1 million check for things that are happening thousands of times across this country, legal subpoenas that are signed off by a grand jury. I mean, it is like the most disgusting thing we could possibly see. So yes, I do think it was worth raising the issue. Whether it would have changed things or not, I can't say because we're reopening. But I think that the work of raising these issues were critically important.
What happens on January 30th of 2026? Do we just get to do this all over again?
We should get back in the room now so that we're not doing this all over again. And we should do it in a bipartisan way. I went to the Rules Committee to offer an amendment that would have stopped the president from these pocket rescissions and from unilaterally making cuts, restoring the 60 vote threshold in the Senate to make cuts. If it's a bipartisan deal to fund the government, it should be a bipartisan deal to make cuts. And on both my amendments in the Rules Committee and for amendments that would have gutted that corruption provision, for amendments that would have given a 1-year or 2-year extension to the subsidies, not only did Republicans not consider them, they couldn't be bothered to be in the room. There was only Chair Fox was the only member of the Rules Committee of the Republican Party who even bothered to have the conversation, who bothered to listen. So I'm trying to be a new member who comes in good faith to offer amendments to make legislation bipartisan. And it's really disappointing that those who are leading this Congress can't even be bothered to have the conversation, can't have the decency to be present as we're having that discussion and that dialogue. It's really corrosive. It's not productive. And I'm going to keep pushing. I'm going to keep trying because I wanted to be supportive of legislation that would have reopened the government, protected our budget prerogatives, and taken care of the healthcare imperative. I think that that would have passed with an overwhelmingly bipartisan margin. I'm going to keep pushing for that, but it's going to take work based on my experience in the Rules Committee this week.
Congressman Johnny Olszewski with us, Democrat of Maryland. Phone lines are open for you to call in. Democrats, Republicans, and independents as usual. We do have that line for federal workers in this segment as well. Would also like to hear from you. As folks are calling in, Congressman, I know you're in the House. I know you're a newer member. But do you think that Chuck Schumer's time as the leader of Democrats in the Senate is drawing to a close?
That's a decision that Democrats in the Senate are going to have to make. What I can tell you is that the legislation that we were asked to support was extremely disappointing for all the reasons we just discussed. The lack of action on the ACA subsidies, and Speaker Johnson wouldn't even promise a vote, which is all that the senators got on that deal, for the lack of protections against cuts and rescissions on the funding we just provided, and for the corruption provisions that were added for U.S. senators. I'm proud of our House leadership and the way in which we stood strong and pushed back against this really partisan effort to fund the government. And, that will be a question that I think that senators will have to answer in the days ahead.